I can say the healing prayer in Finnish, if that's okay. I guess it is.
More than.
Nimesi on parannukseni, o Jumalani, ja muistamisesi lääkkeeni. Olla sinua lähellä on toiveeni ja rakkaus sinuun on kumppanini. Laupeutesi minua kohtaan on parannukseni ja apuni sekä tässä että tulevassa maailmassa. Sinä totisesti olet kaikki antelias, kaikki tietävä, kaikki viisas.
Thank you very much, Nadia Mikkonen, joining us all the way from Finland there. Well, welcome people, welcome. It's an absolute delight to be doing this. A lot of you may know my qualifications when it comes to doing God Passes By. I'm a DJ, which means I press play and ask people to raise their hands. That's as far qualified as I am into this. However, people may know I've read 3 books in my life. One is God Passes By, the other one is The Dawnbreakers, and the third most weighty book is The Very Hungry Caterpillar, which is a children's book. I only got halfway through that. So these 2 books, The Dawnbreakers and God Passes By, have absolutely gripped me and are books that we're told that we should master by the Guardian. And they're gifts from the Guardian. So really talking about God Passes By, what exactly is God Passes By? Many of you may well be aware of what it is. But essentially it's a book that covers the first 100 years of what Shoghi Effendi refers to as the Baha'i era. So starting from 1844 all the way through to 1944. And this is what it is. It's really a kind of a throwback, a look back to try and see where we were, where we are, how it's developed, and indeed the vision ahead. So we're going to go into that. Just going to share a little story as to why and how God Passes By got its name. And the Guardian basically was talking to George Townsend, and he was saying to George, you know, he was sharing some passages with George Townsend and the rest of it, and he said to Mr. Townsend, he said, Mr. Townsend, I would like you to come up for the name of this book. So George thought, brilliant. Mr. Townsend was like, fantastic, I'm going to come up with a name, no problem. A bit of time passed, a bit more time passed, no name for the book. The beloved Guardian then decided to send a little telegram saying, Mr. Townsend, the name for the book. And he said, oh yeah, I forgot to do this. And then he's like, right, I know, here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to the post office and I'm going to cycle there and I'm just going to think of the name as I do it. And lo and behold, what came upon him was God Passes By. So maybe this is a method we can employ in our lives. If there's any decisions you have to make, get on a bicycle and go to a post office. It may or may not help. The other thing is, Baha'u'llah, I think in the Kitab-e-Iqan talks about how the main theme really throughout all the writings is this whole God. It's the presence of God in you know, amongst the world and amongst the people. And this is another reason why it's a very apt title, because obviously the Báb came, His Holiness the Báb, His Holiness Baha'u'llah came to the world and seemingly went by unnoticed. So God had passed by in that sense. So this is where the title came from. We're going to go into the book. At any point, if you have any comments or questions, as I say, just unmute yourself. Feel free to ask, and we'll deal with these questions. The time period that we are looking at in God Passes By is essentially this beginning period that you'll see here, the heroic age. And we'll know that in the heroic age, we have the ministry of the Báb, we have the ministry of Baha'u'llah, and then the ministry of Abdul Baha. So 1844 to 1853, obviously, is the ministry of the Báb. In 53, that's when Baha'u'llah receives his revelation. Then the Báb's revelation is obviously, his ministry goes from 53 to 1892, and then 1892 to 21 as Abdul Baha. And then we end up including in this first 100-year period, this first epoch of the formative age. So we'll see here, this ends in 1944. So this was where in 1944, the Guardian wrote this and he decided to look back. He decided to look back and see what exactly had been going on and wrap things up beautifully. So we're going to go through this to give you an overview of the book itself. You'll see it's broken down into these 4 periods that I've mentioned. The first period dealing with the ministry of the Báb. So much of our first few sessions are going to be going through the ministry of the Bab, and a lot of this, actually, there's a huge overlap, obviously, with the Dawnbreakers, where the Guardian kind of summarizes certain sections, and he sort of takes us through what the Bab, what Sayyid Ali Muhammad came and gave us, and what was happening at the time. The second period, obviously, we're dealing with Baha'u'llah. So we go into a whole bunch of things, his banishment to Iraq, for example, the revelation, the rebellion of Mirza Yahya, his incarceration in Akka, touches on all these things. And then with the ministry of Abdul Baha, we go into the covenant of Baha'u'llah a bit more. And then the rebellion of Abdul Baha's brother, Mirza Muhammad Ali, who caused many, many problems. And then the renewal of Abdul Baha's incarceration, and then this whole incredible story. There's a book, Journey to the Mountain, which talks about the Bab's entombment in Mount Carmel. Then we're going to then we look at the growth and expansion of the faith in the East and West, and the passing of Abdul Baha. So we will deal with all of these things, and then we'll go into the fourth period. But the first few sessions is going to be on this ministry of the Bab from 1844 to 1853. And it's fascinating. It's absolutely fascinating. So we're going to go through some of that. We're going to look at it. We're going to read some, and then we're going to expand a little bit on what exactly is going on. And as I say, any comments, any questions, just throw them out there, and we'll do our best to tackle them. So without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, we'll go with the foreword. I do ask that anyone who, any competent reader who wishes to read, please step forward. I'm not pointing out people as per se. Just feel free to come in and just take over and just read as you go. But if we could please remember to keep our microphones on silent. Yesterday we were interrupted by a goal in football where someone got very excited during the middle of me talking about the Dawnbreakers. He was like, yes! And I thought, wow, he's in love with the Guardian. No, he was in love with Manchester City. Similarities, perhaps. Anyway, could I please ask our first reader, who would like to be the first brave soul to take us into this foreword on God Passes By?
On the 23rd of May of this auspicious year, the Baha'i world will celebrate the centennial anniversary of the founding of the faith of Baha'u'llah. It will commemorate at once the 100th anniversary of the inception of the Bábí dispensation, of the inauguration of the Baha'i era, of the commencement of the Baha'i cycle, and of the birth of Abdul Baha. The weight of the potentialities with which this faith, possessing no peer or equal in the world's spiritual history, and marking the culmination of a universal prophetic cycle, has been endowed, staggers our imagination. The brightness of the millennial glory which it must shed in the fullness of time dazzles our eyes. The magnitude of the shadow which its author will continue to cast on successive prophets destined to be raised up after him eludes our calculation. Already in this, shall I continue?
Yeah.
Already in the space of less than a century, the operation of the mysterious processes generated by its creative spirit has provoked a tumult in human society, such as no mind can fathom. Itself undergoing a period of incubation during its primitive age, it has, through the emergence of its slowly crystallized system, induced a fermentation in the general life of mankind, designed to shake the very foundations of a disordered society, to purify its lifeblood, to reorientate and reconstruct its institutions, and shape its final destiny.
Thank you. So beautifully read. Thank you very much. So there's a couple of things from this. Firstly, and we know about the greatness of His Holiness the Bab, the absolute power and majesty that he possessed, his charm that he had, and this is where it's interesting. Sometimes people look at the Baha'i faith and they try and understand what the link between the Bábí faith and the Baha'i faith is, and I think most of us here pretty much get what it is. But the Guardian really sums it up beautifully when he uses this this expression here, the Baha'i era. And with the Baha'i era, he's talking about, of course, the date of 1844, all the way through to 1944. And this is, we're talking about the Baha'i era. But that obviously started off with the Bab, 44 to 53, started off with the Bab. So it's interesting how we just completely brings the Báb's revelation into this whole Baha'i era. And he uses this term, which is quite interesting to show the interlinkedness of that. And then this other powerful thing here, where we have this mysterious process that's generated by its creative spirit. Can you imagine this creative spirit just exploding out and provoking a tumult in human society that no mind can fathom? I would ask you to try and fathom it, but it's clearly pointless because you can't. But it's just amazing how it's like slowly crystallizing the system. And I guess this is what we're talking about, the growing together, the building of this new world order, this civilization that's slowly taking part. Very interesting. Next reader, please.
To what else can the observant eye or the unprejudiced mind, acquainted with the signs and portents heralding the birth and accompanying the rise of the faith of Baha'u'llah, ascribe this dire, the planetary upheaval, with its attendant destruction, misery and fear, if not to the emergence of his embryonic world order, which, as he himself has unequivocally proclaimed, has deranged the equilibrium of the world and revolutionized mankind's ordered life. To what agency, if not to the irresistible diffusion of that world-shaking, world-energizing, world-redeeming spirit, which the Báb has affirmed is vibrating in the innermost realities of all created things? Can the origins of this portentous, is that how you say it? Portentous crisis, incomprehensible to man and admittedly unprecedented in the annals of the human race, be attributed, in the convulsion of contemporary society, in the frenzied worldwide ebullitions of men's thought, in the fierce antagonism inflaming races, creeds and classes, in the shipwreck of nations, in the downfall of kings, in the dismemberment of empires, in the extinction of dynasties, in the collapse of ecclesiastical hierarchies, in the deterioration of time-honored institutions, in the dissolution of ties, secular as well as religious, that had for so long held together the members of the human race, all manifesting themselves with ever-increasing gravity since the outbreak of the First World War that immediately preceded the opening years of the formative age of the faith of Baha'u'llah. In this we can readily recognize the evidences of the travail of an age that has sustained the impact of his revelation, that has ignored his summons, and is now laboring to be delivered in its burdens as a direct consequence of the impulse communicated to it by the generative, the purifying, the transmuting influence of his spirit.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you, Sandra. Thank you very much. So yeah, we're really focusing on this the Báb coming and creating everything anew. Everything that Sayyid Ali Muhammad brought to us, His Holiness the Báb brought to us, brought actually like reverberating energies, and just completely transformed everything that he touched. He made everything anew, and there's sessions on the Báb that we do that we look into exactly what he did, how he tore things apart. Even when the Báb talks about how we mustn't ascend pulpits to teach people, you know, we should put ourselves to Báb. Essentially, that doesn't reflect on the clergy. Obviously, we know that in mosques people ascend pulpits to try and speak out, and the Báb's essentially bringing about this thing, such a huge change. That's bringing about such a massive change, and it's really it's bringing this. Every atom is vibrating on a different frequency, is what we're understanding, and it's talking about how there's this downfall of these kings, these dynasties. Everything seems to be going into collapse, and this new world order again being built.
It is my purpose on the occasion of the anniversary of such profound significance to attempt in the succeeding pages a survey of the outstanding events.
Jamin, for some reason we're losing you. Thank you so much for that attempt. Would somebody else pretend to be Jamin and carry on reading? You don't need to do the accent. Just go with your with your standard accent.
It is my purpose, on the occasion of an anniversary of such profound significance, to attempt in the succeeding pages a survey of the outstanding events of the century that has seen this spirit burst forth upon the world, as well as the initial stages of its subsequent incarnation in a system that must evolve into an order designed to embrace the whole of mankind and capable of fulfilling the high destiny that awaits man on this planet. I shall endeavour to review in their proper perspective, and despite the comparatively brief space of time which separates us from them, the events which the revolution of 100 years, unique alike in glory and tribulation, has unrolled before our eyes. I shall seek to represent and correlate, in however cursory a manner, those momentous happenings which have insensibly, relentlessly, and under the very eyes of successive generations, perverse, indifferent, or hostile, transformed, heterodox, and seemingly negligible offshoot of the shaky school of the Ithna Ashriya sect of Shia Islam into a world religion, whose unnumbered followers are organically and indissolubly united, whose light has overspread the earth as far as Iceland in the north and Magellanus in the south, whose ramifications have spread to no less than 60 countries of the world, whose literature has been translated and disseminated in no less than 40 languages, whose endowments in the 5 continents of the globe, whether local, national, or international, already run into several $1 million, whose incorporated elective bodies have secured the official recognition of a number of governments in East and West, whose adherents are recruited from the diversified races and chief religions of mankind, whose representatives are to be found in hundreds of cities in both Persia and the United States of America, to whose verities royalty has publicly and repeatedly testified, whose independent status its enemies, from the ranks of its parent religion and in the leading center of both the Arab and Muslim worlds, have proclaimed and demonstrated, and whose claims have been virtually recognized, entitling it to rank as the 4th religion of a land in which its world spiritual center has been established, and which is at once the heart of Christendom, the holiest shrine of the Jewish people, and, save Mecca alone, the most sacred spot in Islam.
Awesome, Sarah. Thank you so much, and well replicated Jamin's accent as well. It was a very, very good effort there. Superb. Okay, thank you. So again, it's talking about these things that are crashing down and the successes. The Guardian starts laying out the successes, and it talks about the great tribulations. It's a revolution of 100 years, unique alike in glory and tribulation, that's been unrolled before our eyes. Such is the massiveness of what's happened in this 100 years that I think the Guardian is trying to get us to zoom out to see what transforming effect has happened. Of course, when it talks about the offshoot of a shaky school, this is making reference to the fact that the Bábí faith essentially came out of the shaky school. Sheikh Ahmad, who had basically told us about the coming of the Imam Mahdi, the 12th Imam. He said that he was going to appear soon. This is who the Báb had claimed to be. And this is where it seems like this heterodox, this very unorthodox-like sect of Shi'i Islam, as it were, this division of Shi'i Islam with the shaky school, they start talking and saying all these things are happening. And all of a sudden, it seems such a small, tiny thing. And then it extends as far as Iceland in the north, all the way to the Magallanes, which we all know is in Argentina, and I didn't have to Google that. That's a common reference point to use. So we're talking about how it just completely spread, how it's gone around 60 countries in the world at the time. and how the literature had been translated. So in a sense, the Guardian's really like proud and pleased with the efforts that it's made. Of course, he's constantly pushing us. He's telling us that we have to raise the game, we have to work harder, we have to do X, Y, and Z. But it's really interesting to how he starts to break it down and says, look at the transformation that's been taking place here. Thank you very much, Sarah. It is not my purpose. Is that where we are?
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, and I believe Natasha's going to read for us. Thank you.
Sure. It is not my purpose, nor does the occasion demand it, to write a detailed history of the last 100 years of the Baha'i faith, nor do I intend to trace the origins of so tremendous a movement, or to portray the conditions under which it was born, or to examine the character of the religion from which it has sprung, or to arrive at an estimate of the effects which its impact upon the fortunes of mankind has produced. I shall rather content myself with a review of the salient features of its birth and rise, as well as of the initial stages in the establishment of its administrative institutions. Institutions which must be regarded as the nucleus and herald of that world order that must incarnate the soul, execute the laws, and fulfill the purpose of the faith of God in this day. Nor will it be my intention to ignore, while surveying the panorama which the revolution of 100 years spreads before our gaze, the swift interweaving of seeming reverses with evident victories, out of which the hand of an inscrutable providence has chosen to form the pattern of the faith from its earliest days, or to minimize those disasters that have so often proved themselves to be the prelude to fresh triumphs, which have in turn stimulated its growth and consolidated its past achievements. Indeed, the history of the first 100 years of its evolution resolves itself into a series of internal and external crises, of varying severity, devastating in their immediate effects, but each mysteriously releasing a corresponding measure of divine power, lending thereby a fresh impulse to its unfoldment, this further unfoldment engendering in its turn a still graver calamity, followed by a still more liberal effusion of celestial grace, enabling its upholders to accelerate still further its march and win in its service still more compelling victories.
Continue.
In its broadest outline, the first century of the Baha'i era may be said to comprise the heroic, the primitive, the apostolic age of the faith of Baha'u'llah, and also the initial stages of the formative, the transitional, the Iron Age, which is to witness and does it move? Okay. Do we go to the next page?
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. Shaping of the creative energies released by his revelation. The first 80 years of the century may roughly be said to have covered the entire period of the first age, while the last 2 decades may be regarded as having witnessed the beginnings of the second. The former commences with the declaration of the Báb, includes the mission of Baha'u'llah, and terminates with the passing of Abdul Baha. The latter is ushered in by his will and testament, which defines its character and establishes its foundation. The century under...
Thank you very much, Natasha. Yeah. So again, there we look at it. He's breaking it down. He's saying that he's not going to go into all the intricate details, but he's going to look at the most salient features. Again, he's trying to give us an overview here, an understanding of what's been going on. And then again, we see that the first 80 years is, if we look at this here, the first 80 years or so roughly deal with the first, second, and third epoch. Again, the ministry of the Báb, the ministry of Baha'u'llah, the ministry of Abdul Baha, and then the rest of it was about the institutions coming into power and the covenant of Abdul Baha and things really building up. And that's what he's going to be focusing on with this.
The century under our review may therefore be considered as falling into 4 distinct periods of unequal duration, each of specific import and of tremendous and indeed unappraisable significance. These 4 periods are closely interrelated and constitute successive acts of one indivisible, stupendous, and sublime drama, whose mystery no intellect can fathom, whose climax no eye can even dimly perceived, whose conclusion no mind can adequately foreshadow. Each of these acts revolves around its own theme, boasts of its own heroes, registers its own tragedies, records its own triumphs, and contributes its own share to the execution of one common, immutable purpose. To isolate any one of them from the others, to dissociate the later manifestations of one universal, all-embracing revelation from the pristine purpose that animated in its earliest days, would be tantamount to a mutilation of the structure on which it rests, and to a lamentable perversion of its truth and of its history. The first period, from 1844 to 1853, centers around the gentle, the useful, and irresistible person of the Báb, matchless in its meekness, imperturbable in his serenity, magnetic in his utterance, unrevealed in the dramatic episodes of his swift and tragic ministry. It begins with the declaration of his mission, culminates in his martyrdom, and ends in a veritable orgy of religious massacre, revolting in its hideousness. It is characterized by 9 years of fierce and relentless contest, whose theater was the whole of Persia, in which above 10,000 heroes laid down their lives, in which 2 sovereigns of the Qajar dynasty and their wicked ministers participated, and which was supported by the entire Shia ecclesiastical hierarchy, by the military resources of the state, and by the impeccable hostility of the masses.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. We'll just pause there for a second. How beautiful is this? Looking at this, successive acts of one indivisible, stupendous, sublime drama whose mystery no intellect can fathom, whose climax no eye can even dimly perceive, whose conclusion no mind can adequately foreshadow. It's amazing, like the way this is one big drama that's being played out. And it talks about how each act has its own theme and how each thing is interrelated with each other, so that these are not separate things, the ministry of Abdul Baha, Baha'u'llah, and the rest of it. They're very much interweaved, very much joined. But this sublime drama, and I think that's part of the reason we have the Dawn Breaks and God Passes By, to actually get us excited, to get us enthused about the sublime drama that we have before us. And then another thing here, as we're looking at the first period, so 44 to 53, obviously 53 we know is when Baha'u'llah got his revelation, when he received his revelation. If you were to try and surmise what the Báb did, you know, the ministry of the Báb, I think just right here, it just sets it out so beautifully. The Guardian just gives it to us. It begins with a declaration of his mission, culminates in his martyrdom, and ends in a veritable orgy of religious massacre revolting in its hideousness. That is essentially it, the snippet that you can take of what the Báb went through. What the Guardian also does in this passage here, which I just find so beautiful, I always like trying to connect with people, okay? Probably a bit too much. There's some stories behind that. But to look at the Báb, here we have something about the qualities of the Báb, right? As who Sayyid Ali Muhammad was as a person. He was someone who was matchless in his meekness, imperturbable in his serenity, and magnetic in his utterance. Just for me, it's like mind-blowing to think, to be around that when the Báb's revealing, when he's speaking that this magnetic. Wow, really lays it down. And then obviously it talks about the Qajar dynasty, who were the dynasty that were ruling at the time. They were known as the Qajaris. And it talks about how above 10,000 heroes laid down their lives. There's much higher estimates than that as well. Really crazy stuff that it sort of lays out in the first period. So thank you very much for reading that, Numira. Next reader, please, for the second period.
The second period derives its inspiration from the august figure of Baha'u'llah, preeminent in holiness, awesome in the majesty of his strength and power, unapproachable in the transcendent brightness of his glory. It opens with the first stirrings in the soul of Baha'u'llah while in the Siachal of Tehran, of the revelation anticipated by the Báb, attains its plenitude in the proclamation of that revelation to the kings and ecclesiastical leaders of the earth, and terminates in the ascension of its author in the vicinity of the present town of Akka. It extends over 39 years of continuous, of unprecedented and overpowering revelation, is marked by the propagation of the faith to the neighboring territories of Turkey, of Russia, of Iraq, of Syria, of Egypt, and of India, and is distinguished by a corresponding aggravation of hostility, represented by the united attacks launched by the Shah of Persia and the Sultan of Turkey, the two admittedly most powerful potentates of the East, as well as by the opposition of the twin sacerdotal orders of Shia and Sunni Islam.
Thank you very much. And just pause there for a second. So we'll see the second period that we're going to start again in a similar manner. He lays out what happened with Baha'u'llah's mission, the whole happening of that. It opens with the first stirring in the soul of Baha'u'llah whilst in the Siachal. So we know in the Siachal, the Black Pit in Tehran, which after the assassination attempt on the life of a Shah by two complete crazy lunatics, Baha'u'llah was put in prison. There's also a very funny story with kebabs there, but we'll touch that later. And then the revelation anticipated by the Báb. So the Báb, who's come and is so magnetic in his utterance, is talking about him whom God shall make manifest. And he mentions this. And so we're now hit with Baha'u'llah. The love that these two had is incredible. And as I was saying in our session yesterday for the Dawnbreakers, there's a letter from the Báb to Baha'u'llah where it says, this is a letter from God to God, which is just crazy if you imagine God writing to himself in that sense. Kind of beautiful. And then we go on to the plenitude and the proclamations, the revelations to the kings. Whilst the prisoner is writing to the kings and rulers of the world, a prisoner is writing and really just laying things down. And then, of course, it terminates in the ascension in Bábí, in the prison town of Akka, as we start to live. So again, he's breaking it down. He's really giving us these little snippets to break things down.
The third period, 1892-1921, revolves around the vibrant personality of Abdul-Baha, mysterious in his essence, unique in his station, astoundingly potent in both the charm and strength of his character. It commences with the announcement of the Covenant of Baha'u'llah, a document without parallel in the history of any earlier dispensation. Attains its climax in the emphatic assertion by the center of that covenant, in the city of the covenant, of the unique character and far-reaching implications of that document, and closes with his passing and the interment of his remains on Mount Carmel. It will go down in history as a period of almost 30 years duration, in which tragedies and triumphs have been so intertwined as to eclipse at one time the orb of the covenant, and at another time to pour forth its light over the continent of Europe and as far as Australasia, the Far East, and the North American continent.
Wow. And again, here we get some things about the personality, who's Abdul-Baha, who's mysterious in his essence, unique in his station, and astoundingly potent in both the charm and strength of his character. Abdul-Baha was charming. He was a charming man. Kind of cool. Next reader, please, the fourth period. Can I suggest people, we don't be shy, we jump in there, we get reading.
The fourth period is motivated by the forces radiating from the will and testament of Abdul-Baha. That charter of Baha'u'llah's New World Order, the offspring resulting from the mystic intercourse between him who is the source of the law of God and the mind of the one who is the vehicle and interpreter of that law. The inception of this last period of the first Baha'i century synchronizes with the birth of the formative age of the Baha'i era, with the founding of the administrative order of the faith of Baha'u'llah, a system which is at once the harbinger, the nucleus, and pattern of his world order. This period, covering for the first 23 years of this formative age, has already been distinguished by an outburst of further hostility of a different character, accelerating on the one hand the diffusion of the faith over a still wider area in each of the 5 continents of the globe, and resulting on the other in the emancipation and the recognition of the independent status of several communities within its pale. These 4 periods are to be regarded not only as the component, the inseparable parts of one stupendous whole, but as a progressive stages in a single evolutionary process, vast, steady, and irresistible. For as we survey the entire range which the operation of a century-old faith has unfolded before us, we cannot escape the conclusion that from whatever angle we view this colossal scene, the events associated with these periods present to us unmistakable evidences of a slowly maturing process, of an orderly development, of internal consolidation, of external expansion, of a gradual emancipation from the fetters of religious orthodoxy, and of a correspondence diminution of civil disabilities and restrictions.
Thank you, Nadine. Thank you. Yvette, Hakeem.
Viewing these periods of Baha'i history as the constituents of a single entity, we note the chain of events proclaiming successfully the rise of a forerunner, the mission of one whose advent that forerunner had promised, the establishment of a covenant generated through the direct authority of the promised one himself, and lastly, the birth of a system, which is a child sprung from both the author of the covenant and its appointed center. We observe how the Báb, the forerunner, announced the impending inception of a divinely conceived order, how Baha'u'llah, the promised one, formulated its laws and ordinances, how Abdul-Baha, the appointed center, delineated its features, and how the present generation of their followers have commenced to erect the framework of its institutions. We watch through these periods the infant light of the faith diffuse itself from its cradle, eastward to India and the Far East, westward to the neighboring territories of Iraq, of Turkey, of Russia, and of Egypt, travel as far as the North American continent, illuminate subsequently the major countries of Europe, envelop with its radiance at a later stage the antipodes, brighten the fringes of the Arctic, and finally set aglow the Central and South American horizons. We witness a corresponding increase in the diversity of the elements within its fellowship, which from being confined in the first period of its history to an obscure body of followers, chiefly recruited from the ranks of the masses of the Shia Persia, has expanded into a fraternity representative of the leading religious systems of the world, of almost every caste and color, from the humblest worker and the peasant to royalty itself. We noticed a similar development in the extent of its literature, a literature which restricted at first to the narrow range of hurriedly transcribed, often corrupted, secretly circulated manuscripts, so furtively perused, so frequently effaced, and at times even eaten by the terrorized members of a prescribed sect, has within the space of a century swelled into innumerable editions, comprising tens of thousands of printed volumes in diverse scripts and in no less than 40 languages, some elaborately reproduced, others profusely illustrated, all methodically and vigorously disseminated through the agency of worldwide, properly constituted and specially organized committees and assemblies. We perceive a no less apparent evolution in the scope of its teachings At first designedly rigid, complex, and severe, subsequently recast, expanded, and liberalized under the succeeding dispensation, later expounded, reaffirmed, and amplified by an appointed interpreter, and lastly, systemized and universally applied to both individuals and institutions. We can discover a no less distinct gradation in the character of the opposition it has had to encounter, an opposition at first kindled in the bosom of Shia Islam, which at a later stage gathered momentum with the banishment of Baha'u'llah to the domains of the Turkish Sultan and the consequent hostility of the more powerful Sunni hierarchy and its caliph, the head of the vast majority of the followers of Muhammad. An opposition which, now, through the rise of a divinely appointed order in the Christian West and its initial impact on civil and ecclesiastical institutions, bids fair to include among its supporters established governments and systems associated with the most ancient, the most deeply entrenched sacerdotal hierarchies in Christendom. We can, at the same time, recognize through the haze of an ever-widening hostility the progress, painful yet persistent, of certain communities within its pale through the stages of obscurity, of prescription, of emancipation, and of recognition, stages that must needs culminate in the course of succeeding centuries, in the establishment of the faith, and the founding, in the plenitude of its power and authority, of the world-embracing Baha'i Commonwealth. We can likewise discern a no less appreciable advance in the rise of its institutions, whether as administrative centers or places of worship, institutions clandestine and subterranean in their earliest beginnings, emerging imperceptibly into the broad daylight of public recognition, legally protected, enriched by pious endowments, ennobled at first by the erection of the Mashar al-Askar of Ishkabad, the first Baha'i house of worship, and more recently immortalized through the rise in the heart of the North American content of the Mother Temple of the West, the forerunner of a slowly maturing civilization. And finally, we can even bear witness to the marked improvement in the conditions surrounding the pilgrimages performed by its devoted adherents to its consecrated shrines at its world center, pilgrimages originally arduous, perilous, tediously long, often made on foot, and at times ending in disappointment, and confined to a handful of harassed Oriental followers, gradually attracting, under steadily improving circumstances of security and comfort, an ever-swelling number of new converts converging from the four corners of the globe and culminating in the widely publicized yet sadly frustrated visit of a noble queen, who at the very threshold of the city of her heart's desire was compelled, according to her own written testimony, to divert her steps and forego the privilege of so priceless a benefit.
Thank you very much, Yvette Hakim. That was an incredible sentence from The Guardian, right there. So quite lengthy, but look at all the things he's picking out so meticulously. The way in which the faith has grown in this way, that way, how it's gone and taken tribes that were literally cannibals, that were eating themselves, transformed them and the rest of them. And this is what it's all about, how the power of the word can take you, can transform you, and how it's spread across from the east, the west, the north, south, all across the world. And so much more now, and it's ridiculous in this time of coronavirus that's hitting the world and affecting all of us. I don't even want to ask the question of how many people we are from around the world connected right here. You know, so we really are a global world, and this is what I think the faith and what the Guardian's talking about it. You know, covering and converging the four corners of the globe, and really just transforming things. So yeah. So this is the foreword. This is the way I think the Guardian trying to get us to view it, of like, yes, there were tribulations. Yes, there was crisis, like horrendous things that had happened, especially with the Bábís. You know, when we go into that and we look to that, especially more on the Dawnbreakers, with people having molten lead poured down their throat, people having holes cut in their body and candles stuck inside them, people having their heads poured with boiling oil as damps. The horrible things that were happening to us guys sitting around here now, I don't know if that's much of a rise, but around the world, connected, trying to study this, trying to bring around this unity and trying to get deeper into the faith and understand things. So thank you very much. That was quite a long passage for you to read, but yeah, thank you to all. Guys, this brings us on now. Unless there's any comments or questions, is there anything anyone would like to comment or any questions that anyone would like to have there? If not, we're going to go on to the first period, which deals with the ministry of the Báb. And this is where, it's the first period, it's the first epoch of the heroic age that we're going to be looking at, and it's the birth of the Bábí revelation, essentially. Again, this book, God Passes By, a lot of it, there are summaries it goes into, and he tries to give this overarching theme of what's going on, where we've come from, where we're going to.
Dave, can we see the timeline again?
The timeline?
Yeah, just quickly.
Sorry, this one?
Yeah. Sure.
So again, the first three epochs being the ministries of the Báb, Baha'u'llah, and Abdul Baha, and then we're looking at the formative age, the first epoch there. So that's the thing. So it all kicks off with this 1844. Of course, the Dawnbreakers kicks off before that with Sheikh Ahmad, but this is what we're looking at. The thing that's happened here, the magnitude of what's happened here, I think what the Guardian's trying to get us to understand, how it's changed everything. The world has stopped and has been remade anew. Things are crumbling. Things are vibrating with a whole different energy. So, who would care to read? Who would like to start us off on the first period, the chapter?
I can do that.
Thank you very much.
First period, the ministry of the Báb, 1844 to 1853. Chapter 1, the birth of the Bábí revelation. May 23, 1844 signalizes the commencement of the most turbulent period of the heroic age of the Baha'i era, an age which marks the opening of the most glorious epoch in the greatest cycle which the spiritual history of mankind has yet witnessed. No more than a span of 9 short years marks the duration of this most spectacular, this most tragic, this most eventful period of the first Baha'i century. It was ushered in by the birth of a revelation whose bearer posterity will acclaim as the point round whom the realities of the prophets and messengers revolve, and terminated with the first stirrings of a still more potent revelation, whose day, Baha'u'llah himself affirms, every prophet hath announced, for which the soul of every divine messenger hath thirsted, and through which God hath proved the hearts of the entire company of his messengers and prophets. Little wonder that the immortal chronicle of the events associated with the birth and rise of the Baha'i revelation has seen fit to devote no less than half of his moving narrative to the description of those happenings, that have during such a brief space of time so greatly enriched, through their tragedy and heroism, the religious annals of mankind. In sheer dramatic power, in the rapidity with which events of momentous importance succeeded each other, in the Holocaust which baptized its birth, in the miraculous circumstances attending the martyrdom of the one who had ushered it in the potentialities with which it had been from the outset so thoroughly impregnated, in the forces to which it eventually gave birth, this 9-year period may well rank as unique in the whole range of man's religious experience. We behold, as we survey the episodes of this first act of a sublime drama, the figure of its master hero, the Báb, arise meteor-like above the horizon of Shiraz, traverse the somber sky of Persia from south to north, decline with tragic swiftness, and perish in a blaze of glory. We see his satellites, a galaxy of God-intoxicated heroes. I'm sorry, this is just such awesome language. I have to just say that I'm in love with it. Okay. A galaxy of God-intoxicated heroes mount above that same horizon, irradiate that same incandescent light, burn themselves out with that self-same swiftness, and impart in their turn an added impetus to the steadily gathering momentum of God's nascent faith. He who communicated the original impulse to so incalculable a movement was none other than the promised Qaim, he who ariseth, the Sahibu Zaman, the Lord of the Age, who assumed the exclusive right of annulling the whole Quranic dispensation, who styled himself the primal point from which have been generated all created things, the countenance of God whose splendor can never be obscured, the light of God whose radiance can never fade. The people among whom he appeared were the most decadent race in the civilized world, grossly ignorant, savage, cruel, steeped in prejudice, servile in their submission to an almost deified hierarchy, recalling in their abjectness the Israelites of Egypt in the days of Moses, in their fanaticism the Jews in the days of Jesus, and in their perversity the idolaters of Arabia in the days of Muhammad. The arch enemy who repudiated his claim, challenged his authority, persecuted his cause, succeeded in almost quenching his light, and who eventually became disintegrated under the impact of his revelation, was the Shia priesthood. Fiercely fanatic, unspeakably corrupt, enjoying unlimited ascendancy over the masses, jealous of their position and could you pronounce that word? Irreconcilably opposed to all liberal ideas, the members of this caste had for 1,000 years invoked the name of the hidden Imam. Their breasts had glowed with the expectation of his advent. Their pulpits had rung with the praises of his world-embracing dominion. Their lips were still devoutly and perpetually murmuring prayers for the hastening of his coming. The willing tools who prostituted their high office for the accomplishment of the enemy's designs were no less than the sovereigns of the Qajar dynasty. First, the bigoted, the sickly, the vacillating Muhammad Shah, who at the last moment cancelled the Báb's imminent visit to the capital, and second, the youthful and inexperienced Nasruddin Shah, who gave his ready assent to the sentence of his captive's death. The arch-villains who joined hands with the prime movers of so wicked a conspiracy were the two Grand Viziers, Haji Mirza Aqasi, the idolized tutor of Muhammad Shah, a vulgar, false-hearted, and fickle-minded schemer, and the arbitrary, bloodthirsty, reckless Amir Nizam, Mirza Taqi Khan, the first of whom exiled the Báb to the mountain fastnesses of Azerbaijan, and the latter decreed his death in Tabriz. Their accomplice in these and other heinous crimes was a government bolstered up by a flock of idle, parasitical princelings and governors, corrupt, incompetent, tenaciously holding to their ill-gotten privileges and utterly subservient to a notoriously degraded clerical order. The heroes whose deeds shine upon the record of this fierce spiritual contest, involving at once people, clergy, monarch, and government, were the Báb's chosen disciples, the letters of the living and their companions, the trailbreakers of the new day, who to so much intrigue, ignorance, depravity, cruelty, superstition, and cowardice opposed a spirit exalted, unquenchable, and awe-inspiring, a knowledge surprisingly profound, an eloquence sweeping in its force, a piety unexcelled in fervor, a courage leonine in its fierceness, a self-abnegation saintly in its purity, a resolve granite-like in its firmness, a vision stupendous in its range, a veneration for the Prophet and his Imams disconcerting to their adversaries, a power of persuasion alarming to their antagonists, a standard of faith and a code of conduct that challenged and revolutionized the lives of their countrymen.
And the mic is dropped. What, as Nadia said, what beautiful language. Describing the Báb as this meteorite that's coming over Iran. Like the whole thing about this being a drama is really being played out, this incredible drama that takes place. They say for 1,000 years they were calling his name. Just to give a bit of background to that, which some of us may well know, but in Shia Islam, certainly the Twelver sect, which is the majority in Iran, they believe that there are these imams that come and take place after Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, passes away, that the son-in-law and cousin, Imam Ali, is the next one to take over, like the guardian. After him, we then have his two sons. We have Hassan and we have Hussein. And then it goes down all the way until the 11th one. And pretty much all of these imams seem to be poisoned or killed, and people are against them. But the 12th one, he, as a child, apparently goes into hiding. He goes into hiding. Some people say he's living in a well. Who knows? He goes into hiding. And there were these four gates, these people known as four gates, essentially, who were communing with the 12th imam. So the first one is communing with him. He then passes away. The second one passes away. The third one. And the fourth one, he then says, in the year 260, the Islamic year 260, we will not hear from the 12th imam for 1,000 years. And this is where, if we remember, we hear the Báb say, I am the one whose name for over 1,000 years you have invoked. This is what it's making reference to, because that fourth gate that was communing with the 12th imam, the Ga'em, as we believe, who the Báb claims to be, he says that he'll, in 1,000 years, he shall reappear. So this is what it's talking about, the whole 1,000 years. But he comes in and he's got these people against him. When we talk about the Grand Viziers, we're talking about the prime ministers. So he mentions two of the kings. He mentions the King Muhammad Shah and his prime minister, Haji Mirza Agassi, which he may be related to Andre Agassi. We can neither confirm nor confirm nor deny. I don't know. There could be some link there. And then we have obviously Nasruddin Shah, who then comes into power, and his prime minister, Mirza Taqi Khan. So he makes a little mention about how the Báb was meant to go up from Shiraz to Tehran to meet him, but he was put into the two prisons. And he gives us a little overview of what's happening, and this fierce opposition to him. And what's crazy, when we look at the life of the Báb, we know that in the Báb's 6 years of prophetic revelation, he had revealed 5 million words. This is what we have digitized in Haifa right now. The Baha'u'llah in almost 40 years revealed 6 million. Such was the intensity of the coming of the Báb. It was such an intense time when he was coming in and doing everything. It was all explosive and crazy. Now we're going to go on to the opening scene the guidance going to go into. He's given this kind of sweeping like window into like what's going on. As Nadi said, using such beautiful language. We're going to go into the opening scene. Who would care to read? We've had a lot of the women have been very strong in reading, and I think there's been one guy who then cut out. But whoever it is, I mean, there's no competition here. Who would like to read?
I know. Can I beg David?
Oh, Dr. Fanan Apazir, we have a scholar amongst us. So
No, seriously, I'm so...
We've lost you. You're so... If this was during the fast, I might think you're saying hungry, but I'm guessing that's not. Dr. Fanan Apazir? We have temporarily lost him, unfortunately. I'm going to have to ask you to share your thoughts, maybe.
Okay, all right, thank you.
We can't hear you, unfortunately. You keep cutting out. But I'm very intrigued to know what you're saying. It's a mystery. Maybe nearer the end of the call, that your voice would come back. Unfortunately, we're not too clear with that. Would somebody else care to read, please? Anybody?
The opening scene of the initial act of this great drama was laid in the upper chamber of the modest residence of the son of a mercer of Shiraz, in an obscure corner of that city. The time was the hour before sunset, on the 22nd day of May, 1844. The participants were the Báb, a 25-year-old Sayyid of pure and holy lineage, and the young Mullah Hussein, the first to believe in him. Their meeting immediately before that interview seemed to be purely fortuitous. The interview itself was protracted till the hour of dawn. The host remained closeted alone with his guest, nor was the sleeping city remotely aware of the import of the conversation they held with each other. No record has passed to posterity of that unique night, save the fragmentary but highly illuminating account that fell from the lips of Mullah Hussein. I sat spellbound by his utterance, oblivious of time and of those who awaited me. He himself has testified, after describing the nature of the questions he had put to his host and the conclusive replies he had received from him, replies which had established beyond the shadow of a doubt the validity of his claim to be the promised Qayyam. Suddenly, the call of the Muladin, summoning the faithful to their morning prayer, awakened me from the state of ecstasy into which I seemed to have fallen. All the delights, all the ineffable glories, which the Almighty has recounted in his book, as the priceless possessions of the people of paradise, these I seemed to be experiencing that night. Methinks I was in a place of which it could be truly said, therein no toil shall reach us, and therein no weariness shall touch us. No vain discourse shall they hear therein, nor any falsehood, but only the cry, peace, peace. Their cry therein shall be, glory to thee, O God, and their salutation therein, peace, and the close of their cry, praise be to God, Lord of all creatures. Sleep had departed from me that night. I was enthralled by the music of that voice, which rose and fell as he chanted, now swelling forth as he revealed the verses of the Qayyam al-Asma, again acquiring ethereal subtle harmonies as he uttered the prayers he was revealing. At the end of each invocation, he would repeat this verse, far from the glory of thy Lord, the all-glorious, be that which his creatures affirm of him, and peace be upon his messengers, and praise be to God, the Lord of all beings. This revelation, Mullah Hussein has further testified, so suddenly and impetuously thrust upon me, came as a thunderbolt, which for a time seemed to have benumbed my faculties. I was blinded by its dazzling splendor and overwhelmed by its crushing force. Excitement, joy, awe, and wonder stirred the depths of my soul. Predominant among these emotions was a sense of gladness and a strength which seemed to have transfigured me. How feeble and impotent, how dejected and timid I had felt previously. Then I could neither write nor walk, so tremulous were my hands and feet. Now, however, the knowledge of his revelation had galvanized my being. I felt possessed of such courage and power that were the world, all its peoples and potentiates, to rise,
Potentates, I think.
Oh, thank you, potentates, sorry, to rise against me, I would alone and undaunted withstand their onslaught. The universe seemed but a handful of dust in my grasp. I seemed to be the voice of great Gabriel personified, calling unto all mankind, awake, for lo, the morning light has broken. Arise, for his cause is made manifest. The portal of his grace is open wide. Enter therein, O peoples of the world, for he who is your promised one is come.
Thank you, Mariam. So beautifully read. What a beautiful, touching scene we have. We have Mullah Hussein, and again, I'm pretty sure all of us are familiar with this story, but we have Mullah Hussein, the first one who was going to come into contact with this being that earlier on we read that Prophet's thirst for the soul of the Bab. Such is this momentous occasion that's taking place. A mortal, Mullah Hussein, who used to walk around, by the way, who didn't have shoes on his feet, who had a shirt without buttons, as a very sharp mind, very well versed in the Quran, who then, when he meets the Bab, He's brought in, and what does he say? He has tremulous hands. He feels the excitement, the joy, the awe stirring the depths of his soul. Such a thing is taking place. So much to the point where we know that the Barber thing asked him not to go outside because they said people will think you are crazy for what he has just witnessed. We know that the Bab was revealing the verses of the Gayom al-Azmar. The Gayom al-Azmar, which is one of the mightiest books that the Bab, the greatest that the Bab has written. The Gayom al-Azmar is the Tafsir Surah Yusuf, the commentary on the Surah of Joseph, which is something that's perplexed people. And he revealed actually just the first verse, I think it's the Surah of Milk, the Surah of Dominion, if I'm not mistaken. And that was the first thing he just kind of starts revealing. And that alone just completely blows Mullah Hussein's mind. He doesn't know what to do. Such is the power, such is the beauty of this drama that the Guardian keeps talking about. And this is how our faith kind of kicks off. I'm so sad that Dr. Fanan Abazir couldn't be heard as well, because he would have dropped such gems. Every time he speaks, he's just full of such gems. Maybe you could try again, and your signal may be stronger, Doctor. But please, next reader. Who wants to come in with this? But just if we understand the gravitas of what's just taken place, it's insane. This light that comes out, I think this almost can be taken literally. I don't know this light that blinds him, which is just so powerful. Next reader, please.
A more significant light, however, is shed on this episode, marking the declaration of the mission of the Bab by the perusal of that first, greatest and mightiest of all books in the Bábí dispensation, the celebrated commentary on the Surah of Joseph, the first chapter of which, we are assured, proceeded in its entirety in the course of that night of nights from the pen of its divine revealer. The description of this episode by Mullah Hussein, as well as the opening pages of that book, attest the magnitude and force of that weighty declaration.
Space.
Sorry, Milad, could you mute yourself, please? I've muted you. There we are. Carry on, please.
A claim to be no less than the mouthpiece of God himself, promised by the prophets of bygone ages, the assertion that he was, at the same time, the herald of one immeasurably greater than himself, the summons which he trumpeted forth to the kings and princes of the earth, the dire warnings directed to the chief magistrate of the realm, Muhammad Shah, the counsel imparted to Haji Mirza Arosi to fear God, and the peremptory command to abdicate his authority as Grand Vizier of the Shah and submit to the one who is the inheritor of the earth and all that is therein. The challenge issued to the rulers of the world, proclaiming the self-sufficiency of his cause, denouncing the vanity of their ephemeral power, and calling upon them to lay aside one and all their dominion, and deliver his message to lands in both the East and the West. These constitute the dominant features of that initial contact that marked the birth and fixed the date of the inception of the most glorious era in the spiritual life of mankind.
With this historic declaration of the dawn of an age that signalizes the consummation of all ages had broken, the first impulse of a momentous revelation had been communicated to the one, but for whom, according to the testimony of the Kitab Iran, God would not have been established upon the seat of his mercy, nor ascended the throne of eternal glory. Not until 40 days had elapsed, however, did the enrollment of the 17 remaining letters of the living commence. Gradually, spontaneously, some in sleep, others while awake, some through fasting and prayer, others through dreams and visions, they discovered the object of their quest, and were enlisted under the banner of the newborn faith. The last, but in rank the first, of these letters to be inscribed on the preserved tablet was the erudite, the 22-year-old Quddus, a direct descendant of the Imam Hassan and the most esteemed disciple of Sayyid Kazim. Immediately preceding him, a woman, the only one of her sex, who, unlike her fellow disciples, never attained the presence of the Bab, was invested with the rank of apostleship in the new dispensation. A poetess less than 30 years of age, of distinguished birth, of bewitching charm, of captivating eloquence, indomitable in spirit, unorthodox in her views, audacious in her acts, immortalized as Tahira, the pure one, by the tongue of glory, and surnamed Quratul. Dave, how do I say that? Thank you. Qurat al-Ayn, solace of the eyes, by Sayyid Kazim, her teacher. She had, in consequence of the appearance of the Bab to her in a dream, received the first intimation of a cause which was destined to exalt her to the fairest heights of fame, and on which she, through her bold heroism, was to shed such imperishable luster. These first letters generated from the primal point, this company of angels arrayed before God on the day of his coming. These repositories of his mystery, these springs that have welled out from the source of his revelation. These first companions who, in the words of the Persian Bayan, enjoy nearest access to God. These luminaries that have from everlasting bowed down and will everlastingly continue to bow down before the celestial throne. And lastly, these elders mentioned in the book of Revelation as sitting before God on their seats, clothed in white raiment and wearing on their heads crowns of gold. These were, ere their dispersal, summoned of the Bab's presence, who addressed to them his parting words, entrusted to each a specific task, and assigned to some of them as the proper field of their activities, their native provinces. He enjoined them to observe the utmost caution and moderation in their behavior, unveiled the loftiness of their rank, and stressed the magnitude of their responsibilities. He recalled the words addressed by Jesus to his disciples, and emphasized the superlative greatness of the new day. He warned them lest by turning back they forfeit the kingdom of God, and assured them that if they did God's bidding, God would make them his heirs and spiritual leaders among men. He hinted at the secret and announced the approach of a still mightier day, and bade them prepare themselves for its advent. He called to remembrance the triumph of Abraham over Nimrod, of Moses over Pharaoh, of Jesus over the Jewish people, and of Muhammad over the tribes of Arabia, and asserted the inevitability and ultimate ascendancy of his own revelation. To the care of Mullah Hussein, he committed a mission, more specific in character and mightier in import. He affirmed that his covenant with him had been established, cautioned him to be forbearing in the divines he would encounter, directed him to proceed to Tehran, and alluded in the most glowing terms to the as yet unrevealed mystery enshrined in that city, a mystery that would, he affirmed, transcend the light shed by both Hijaz and Shiraz.
Wow. Thank you so much. Thank you, Natasha. So now the Guardian's bringing in the letters of the living, the first 18 souls to believe in the Bab. The reason why we have the number 18, we don't need to go into the depth of this here, but there's this beautiful thing, as you may know, with the number 19. And the number 19 represents the word Vahed. Vahed meaning unity or one. And in scripture, you have this thing known as the abjad system, where A equals 1, B equals 2, and so on and so forth. And this word Vahed, which means unity or one, when you add the value of the letters up together, become 19. And this is why the Bab was waiting for 18 to join him. So the Bab plus the 18 made the 19, made the one, made the unity. And you will see this in our calendars. In the Baha'i calendar, we have 19 days and 19 years. There was 19 apostles of Baha'u'llah. This 19 keeps repeating and repeating, which is a really powerful thing. And the whole abjad system is very interesting. And the Bab uses this a lot, because bear in mind, he's dealing with a predominantly Shiite audience. So everything he's talking is in those terms. And it's very specific, it's very esoteric. But you have these things, and he talks about Godus. Godus, who was the last letter of the living, who was first in rank. Godus is also known as the moon of guidance. And I love that title, the moon of guidance. What does that mean, the moon of guidance? Essentially, if you look at the Bab being the sun that's bringing out the light, when the Bab is taken, the Bab is in prison, and he's up in the prison in Marku, and then in Chehreg, and he's blessed. Who's the one who's kind of running things in a large way, apart from Baha'u'llah, of course? is Godus. So when you have the sun, what illumines things at night? Nothing but the moon. So it's the light of the sun that hits the moon and then reflects in the dark. Such a beautiful title. And then, so we hear about him. We hear about Godus, how he's the first in rank. We hear about the incredible Tahireh, who was just mind-blowing. And something I found out recently, I was at a talk with none other than Nader Saidi, Larry David, and Nader had basically read through, he's, I think, the only person alive, to my understanding, that was called by the House of Justice to read through all the writings of the Báb, to go through them and actually trying to categorize them and figure them out. And in there he found, when he was reading, he read that 17 of the letters of the living, all of them, if you were to take all their qualities, they could be found in one. And that one it could be found in was in Tahireh. Such as the station, the power of Tahireh, it's just insane. Absolutely mind-blowing. And obviously we learn a bit about Mullah Hussein at the end, who we know that Mullah Hussein is going to go on this mission, and it says that he will meet a mystery that he affirmed would transcend the light shed by both Hijaz and Shiraz. Hijaz, obviously, the area that encompasses both Mecca and Medina, so I think a reference to Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, and Shiraz, of course, to the Báb. So it's prophesied that this is what's going to happen to Mullah Hussein. Also, we have this beautiful, in the Dawnbreakers, for those people who will study the Dawnbreakers with us, you'll know there's this address by the Báb to the letters of the living as he sends them out. Highly recommend you go and look at that and read that. So powerful, and not just for the letters of the living, for us as well. We will carry on. Any comments?
Sorry, can I ask a question, please?
Evidently.
Since you were talking about the symbolism of the 19, at the beginning of the passage, it was mentioned that it was not before 40 days that the 18 letters of the living. I know that, for example, in Christianity, the 40 days, it has a symbolism. So I was wondering if there's like a connection. I don't remember if Ramadan is also 40 days or something like that.
So 40, you're right, actually. Before Mullah Hussein, who with his uncle and his nephew, before he goes in search of the Báb. If we remember the story, that Mullah Hussein had been on travels, he then comes back to find that his master, Sayyid Kazim, has passed away. And he says to all the rest of the disciples, what did Sayyid Kazim say we should do? And Sayyid Kazim says to them, you should go and look for the promised one. Go and look for him right now. And everyone comes up with these different excuses. They don't want to do it. And it's like, Zhenya, why aren't you going? Zhenya's like, oh, I have to look after the kids. Natasha, what are you doing? Oh, I have a bicycle I've got to make. Okay, cool. Enoli, what are you doing? I have to eat French pastry. Whatever it is, people keep coming up with excuses. And then Mullah Hussein at this point says, you know what? I'm going. But then he goes and sits with his brother and his nephew. And for 40 days, he sits in prayer and meditation. This number 40 keeps coming up. It's countless. It's in the Bible countless times, and there is a very special significance to it. Something that perhaps Dr. Fanon Al-Hazira could expand on next time, or we can go into next time. But the way numbers are used, you're absolutely right to pick up on that. Is phenomenal. The way that 19 is used, that 95 is used, 361, all of these different combinations. Absolutely, you've picked up on something very, very good there. But yes, it's something that does appear time and time again, indeed.
Talene also had a question on the message board.
Could someone read it out?
There was a question of just wanted to ask, what does the primal point as a title for the Báb mean?
The primal point. So I imagine there's a few different explanations, but essentially, anytime you write anything, essentially the primal point is the point at which everything starts, and the point at which everything emanates from. So if you were to take a pen and you were to try and write anything you write starts with a point. You put your pen to the paper, this is where it all emanates from. So this is the primal point, to my understanding. There may well be other understandings of this as well, but that's essentially what it is, that everything is emanating, obviously, from God, but through the Báb. And the Báb is the start of everything. Godus, interestingly, is also known as the Nochte Ochar, the final point as well. So I think this is what the primal point is referring to, that this is that point that we're talking about, the thing that starts absolutely everything. Don't know if there's any other questions or anything. What I am aware, though, people, it is 7:30 here in London. And I could talk about this for hours and hours, and we're just getting into it. It's just starting to pick up and get excited. But unfortunately, we're going to have to leave it now till Wednesday, where we will continue, same time, same place, different day, obviously.
In thy name, the sufficer, the healer, the fulfiller, the loftiest, the supreme, the Baha'u'llah. We ask thee by thine ancient beauty, we supplicate thee by the manifestation of thy greatest majesty, and thy name around which the heavens of the manifestation revolve, by whose power the waters of the ocean overflow, the full moons appear, and the light is diffused. Verily, the hidden and the manifest. We ask thee that all sorrow may be turned into joy, and all disease may be turned into health, and that every sick, afflicted, unfortunate, and constrained one may be healed of the seen and the unseen disease. Baha'u'llah.